We're continuing with Revelation, and again, we do record it, and my wife sends out the slides and the MP4 video, which is on YouTube. And we will continue and pick up. We were talking about Revelation chapter 6, verses actually 1 through 8. We're talking about the horses. And the horses are the beginning salvo of the tribulation period. And we have the white horse, red horse, black horse, and pale horse. And to give us more of an idea, I believe that the horses are very quickly galloping toward their mark, if you will. It's like the old radio days, right? They used to have a guy do that. Anyway, so the horses are galloping, and the cause is CO1. So the cause of this what I would call it a mega event. In other words, it's a number of small events within one definite big event. And the cause is the white horse rider. He comes with a bow but no arrows. He takes over without firing a shot. And he is not Jesus. We know that for a number of reasons. In chapter 19, Jesus has many names on him. He is riding a white horse, but he's wearing a diadem or diadems, which is a type of crown that is inherited, whatever. In other words, like Prince Charles had a crown on his head, and he has it now. So basically, when it's a rightful owner of the crown, when the crown is given by who you are and your inheritance, then you have a diadem. But the writer in this horse has a different Greek word for his crown. It's Stephanos, and it's where we get the name Stephan. And so that crown is actually the wreath of the Olympic Games. It's not really a crown in the sense of a crown, but it's called a crown. The wreath is given by men rewarding a man for something, like the winner of the Olympic Games. In other words, God has not given him this crown. Men have given them this crown. So very big difference between this chapter 6 writer and chapter 19 writer, who is Jesus. And we see that the cause of it is in some way this writer. We don't get a lot of detail about how he causes it in this. We just see that he comes on the scene and immediately the red horse happens. So in some way, he's obviously connected with bringing about these events. And if he is indeed who we think he is, the Antichrist coming on the scene, that means Satan is the one working through him, and the demonic powers are going out and organizing this war. The red horse, I call it World War III because it seems like the obvious moniker for that. We haven't had a World War III. I've been noticing just about every week somebody in Russia or United States or somewhere, as I monitor all the news, is saying, are we on the verge of World War III? Has World War III already started? I have so many. I could have listed them on a screen, but every week it's coming out. These are secular people. They don't know anything about the Bible, but they realize that we're in a very dangerous position right now. I'm not saying this is happening soon. I'm just saying events are so pronounced that even the secular people realize what time it is. And if it is indeed World War III, which I believe it is, and we're going to study Ezekiel and look at that further, then the immediate aftermath of a horrible conflagration is going to be economic collapse. It doesn't take much for economic collapse, but even if you look at the Ukraine, right, probably people know that that's been going on for quite a while now. Well, their economy is in shambles. You can't be in the middle of a horrible war and not have economic collapse. So I think this speaks also to the fact that the war, whatever its dimensions, is going to result in economic collapse. And then we have the long range effects, the pale horse of death. And I believe that what we read about there, it doesn't specifically mention radiation. It mentions disease, hunger, and wild beasts. But I believe this is going to be a nuclear conflagration. Again, the things I'm reading, they're always focusing on that worst case, Russia and the United States and some other powers get in on it, it's going to be some kind of a nuclear conflagration. And that's just my 2 cents, but I think there's a lot of proof to it. I'm going to teach with a method I call the unified prophetic theory. You can call it whatever you want to. I just made that up because it sounds good. But what we're going to do is look at the Old Testament prophetic scriptures, because the Grand Central Station is the book of Revelation. So in Grand Central Station, I think they have like 8 rail lines coming into Grand Central. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I think I'm going to have to turn down my gizmos.
There's just a lot of noise outside.
Speaking louder now. Speaking louder now. AI is working for me. Okay, and so we have the Old Testament prophetic scriptures, and there's many of them, but not as many as you think, as far as key ones we're going to look at. And then we have all the gospel prophetic passages. There's not a whole lot there. They're in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, mainly because that wasn't Jesus's main mission. He didn't come to teach end times. And then we have all the prophetic passages in the epistles. That's especially where we know about the rapture. And then we have the book of Revelation where they all come together. So in a sense, you have to know the Old Testament scriptures to understand how they all converge in the Revelation. So in other words, it's kind of a two-way street. To really understand all of Revelation, you have to know the Old, but you also have to know the Old to even further understand those scriptures in context of the future, which is seen in Revelation. So it all goes together. Not to denigrate the Old Testament versus New Testament. It's a matter of it's one unified whole prophetic scripture. But we are focusing on Revelation. That's the teaching of this book. So I'm going to go down and really quickly look at a number of prophetic scriptures so you can see the key ones. And from my viewpoint, I see about 13 key chapters. It's not a hard and fast number. There are many passages, but over and over again, as I've studied prophecy for many decades, I see people consistently going back to these particular Old Testament passages. I mean, in other words, pretty much everybody, no matter how they look at it, study these. Their information is coming from these sources. Daniel is a very big prophetic book. Daniel was in the captivity when Babylon and the Babylonians took him and his fellows to Babylon. Babylon means land of Babel, by the way, because of the Tower of Babel. So since the Tower of Babel was in that land, the old-timey word for land is very much the same as lawn. In fact, a Scottish guy would probably say, it's our lawn, So I mean, you can see where it came from. So Babylon means land of confusion. But at any rate, he was taken there by Nebuchadnezzar and his fellows, and that's where he wrote all these prophecies of the book. And then later, when he was taken into the Medo-Persia kingdom, also with Cyrus, etc., he continued writing more things. So God gave him these things. And rather than just read through them, which would probably bore some people. Michael Sr., is that going to bore you? No, he wouldn't get bored, but that's okay. He's a teacher, that's why. He's only in here because I don't know why he's in here really, but but we appreciate him. I think it's because you're not teaching at this time. You're teaching an earlier class.
Taking a break.
Oh, he's taking a break. I've thought about that, but I'm afraid I'll get rusty at my age. I can't afford to take off too long. Okay, so anyway, Daniel 2, I think most people have heard this because there's usually a pastoral sermon on it. People often depart from this. They'll talk about the image. Of course, the big favorite is throwing the boys in the furnace, is a little shaver. I used to hear stories about that. But there's meat, there's prophetic insight in all of Daniel. Daniel 2 is the image, and where he's given the future of all Gentile worldly powers from his time forward. there were several kingdoms before his time, which would have been the Egyptian kingdom, which kept the Jews in captivity, and also there would be the Assyrian, not Syrian, but Assyrian kingdom, and they took the northern kingdom into captivity. And then we have the southern kingdom was taken, and Daniel was taken into captivity. So he was given to see the head of gold, which is Nebuchadnezzar, the silver shoulders, which were the Media and Persian, and then there's the stomach of brass, and there's four muscle groups here, and Alexander's kingdom of the Greeks, and his kingdom then, when he died, went to his four generals. So it's amazing how this fits. And then his legs of iron, which is the Roman Empire, go all the way down to the toes of iron and clay. And those 10 toes are the end times. How do we know that? Because it says the rock not cut by hands. In other words, like the rock made by God, the rock who is God, will come and smash the toes. So he's given us 2,500 years, 25 centuries of history. You say, well, what's coming in the future? He gave it to us. We got all of it here. It's a matter of understanding it all, how it all fits together. So then the four beasts, again, this is a further look at the coming of the Gentile kingdoms, but in terms of beasts rather than a statue. And the big point there is the fourth beast, which is the Roman Empire. Most people believe that is the newly revived Roman Empire, has a little horn coming out of it. And scholars believe the little horn refers to Antichrist. So in other words, when that fourth beast comes into being again, I say again because the Roman Empire split between East and West in around 500 AD. And when it split, it went into the East and Western Roman empires. And after 400 something, the Roman Empire, one leg, disappeared. It continued on in the form of the Roman Catholic Church. That's why we call it Roman Catholic Church. So the empire never ceased in the sense of overall ceasing. It ceased as a military political entity, and it continued on as a spiritual entity. And then the other side of that, when the Roman Empire split, the Eastern Empire, which was the empire ruled by Constantinople, named after Constantine. That's the emperor who made Christianity legitimate. So he founded a new city, and that city became the capital of the Eastern Empire. And because the empire had accepted Christianity, it became the center of all of the Orthodox. So I don't want to get too deep, but basically that empire lasted another 1,000 years. So it wasn't until about the time Columbus discovered America that empire disappeared. So when you hear Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, Coptic Orthodox, that's Egyptian, and all these Orthodoxes, they all had their center of religious hierarchy in Constantinople. And so when the Turks came in 1517 and destroyed Constantinople, they rebuilt it and renamed it. And today you'll probably hear the name Istanbul. Istanbul is actually Constantinople. Okay. But at any rate, without getting too deep in history, I just wanted you to see that these prophecies were extremely accurate. Of course, they are, God made them. And then to be more specific, in Daniel chapter 8, and we're going to send out the slides if you want to look at this further. When he died, his four generals took over, and he died as a very young person. I think he was 33 years old, and he had conquered the known world. When they say known world, they're not talking about China or some other place. The known world for Europeans was around the Mediterranean. Europeans are very centric on that area. They didn't know much about the rest of the world anyway until Marco Polo. But very limited look at the world. Basically, Europe, Middle East, and Africa is all they knew about. But when also from God's standpoint, I should say, God's only concerned with Israel and surrounding Israel. You say, why don't we hear about China and the various dynasties of China? Because that has nothing to do with prophecy up until the very, very end. So God didn't forget about those people. It's a matter of they're not germane to the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. So what we have here is his generals took over, and they split his kingdom into four parts. The main part that we want to center on in Bible prophecy is the Ptolemaic, which is Ptolemy as general took over Egypt and that area, and then the Seleucid Empire, which is at the time of Christ, but just before Christ, the Middle East. So those are the focus after that. The other two generals and what they took over is not that important. All that to say, he's reiterating this. He's coming at this from a different viewpoint to try to explain what it is. And historically, this was before any of this happened, keep in mind, and it's historically verified. It's not a matter of, oh, somebody looked at history and later wrote Daniel. That's not how it happened. Daniel got this, and it's obvious to anybody who's a serious student that Daniel was written, when he was in the Babylonian captivity. So that was many hundreds of years before it occurred. And that's the case with all Bible prophecy. Bible prophecy is history before it happens. Okay, that's why it's important for us to know. The 70 weeks is the most critical prophecy of Daniel because that's where we first find out about the tribulation. And there's an important point to learn here because in chapter 9 of Daniel, verse 2, Daniel was rewarded because he, as a student of prophecy, studied Jeremiah. And that's the principle for us. As we study prophecy, God will reward us with knowing more. He studied Jeremiah, had been in captivity, which was not a good experience for the Jews in general. And he was reading Jeremiah. He believed Jeremiah and the prophets, and he read them. And Jeremiah said that his people would be in captivity for 70 years. So Daniel and the angel Gabriel comes and says, you've been studying, basically, I'm going to paraphrase, you've been studying Jeremiah. And since you've been studying that and you understand that the time is up, you just counted 70 years and go, hey, 70 years is up. And so he was praying, and the angel came to give him not only what would be the time now, his time now, but would project into the very end of time in just a few verses. So Daniel 9:20 through 27, in particular, just one verse, Daniel 9:27, gives us the time frame to the end of this world's Gentile ruling system. So a lot of his prophecy, as you can see, has to do with history of the Gentiles. So what we're going to do is we look at it, we're going to see that the last 7 years was given to Daniel in this little passage here from 20 to 27, 500 years before Christ was born, 2,500 years ago, which has not yet happened. He wrote about what was going to happen, as we know. Hindsight is great. We know now it's 2,500 years ago. It still hasn't happened, but we're on the verge of it happening. So in chapter 11, shows you how meaty Daniel is. He's talking about the future wars and Antichrist. So it's a little bit hard to discern unless you know this dividing point, chapter 11. Chapter 11, verse 1 through 35, historically fulfilled, talks about real events that occurred. And then we switch gears, which is common in many of the prophecies and the prophetic writings. We switch gears, and what he talks about from verse 35 through 45 is the future Antichrist and his fulfillment. So when you read that, just keep that in mind. Daniel 12 is probably one of the most poignant passages for us as we study because he gives us more information about the tribulation. So in chapter 9, he talks about the fact that there'll be a 7-year period of at the very end, that there will be the man of sin, the Antichrist, come along, that there will be a period, a Shabbat in Hebrew, of 7 years, and that it will be the last part of the time of the Gentile rule. Or maybe another way to say it is it'll be the time of the toes. It's the toes time. So that's what he talks about there. But then he goes further here, and he gives us a little bit more information about that time in 12:1. It'll be a time like no other. And I've mentioned before, tribulation has a lot of meanings, but we have the 2,000-year tribulation with a small t. We have we have a news broadcast coming in hot off. And then we have tribulation, which is a capital T, and that's the last 7 years. And then the word mentions in specific the Great Tribulation, which we'll see in verse 7. So there are 3 different types of tribulation, and if we mix them up and confuse them, then we're not going to be able to understand the book. Something that is maybe a little hidden, something that's a little cryptic, a little mysterious, but I believe we're in a position now of being able to see what he's talking about, that people are going to increase in knowledge and go to and fro. Well, knowledge increases now. Last I heard, I think a few years back, it was 2.5 years to double all knowledge. Now, then it's 2 years. I think it may be 18 months now. In other words, all knowledge in the history of mankind is doubled every 18 months. Doesn't mean everybody's aware of it. Probably most people in this room are not aware of that because that information is being gathered and stored in computers that you don't have access to unless you know where to look. So nobody, it used to be, in the olden days, you had these great thinkers, Archimedes and Plato and all these people, early scientists. And, one guy pretty much knew everything as far as what they knew. We call them geniuses, right? So they knew all the knowledge of that time, but they didn't know hardly anything. They knew a little smidgen of true knowledge, They gathered some info. And now we're at the point where no man can possibly know, not only can't know all of it, can't even know a particular area. I work for a company of, I don't know, 150, 60,000 people worldwide, and we're all divided in these little groups, and I'm in one little group. And, I've often heard people talk about, they said, well, but who knows this area? And then somebody will say, well, we don't know who knows that. And then they'll say something like, well, nobody can know all of Oracle. And it's true. There's nobody in the company that knows all of it because it is so deep now, and it's so intricate and it's so detailed that like I just focus on one little slice. That's all I do. And I kind of know certain other teams are around, and I'll call them in for advice. But there's nobody, including the founder, that knows the whole enchilada. Because knowledge, you can't know it. AI is almost kind of working us back into that. The theory is with AI, you can know everything. That AI only gives you, the information it's programmed. They call it a large language model. In other words, they're picking sources of information, and that's used to train the AI. And you ask AI, and you get a lot of answers. So for the first time in history, it's like a curve. Everybody, a few guys knew everything, and then as we went, there's nobody that hardly knew anything. And now we're starting with AI to go back up where the average person can know a lot more. With AI, you can know more than the greatest geniuses 50 years ago because everything they knew is in there plus more. And it has in its infancy. It's only a little over a year old for the public. But this is part, I believe, of what Daniel is getting at. Knowledge shall be exponentially increased. That's how I phrase it. And how can it be exponentially increased? Computers and AI. That's how it's happening. So if you say, oh, it's always been like this. No, even when I was in college and until, a couple of decades ago, I couldn't go to a computer and say, computer, I have that in my house. Computer, what is the date of the Battle of Hastings? It'll tell me. I can know anything I need to know. It's limits, but it's getting really smart. And geniuses like Elon Musk are definitely afraid of it. There's I think, over 100 scientists that are warning that it will end civilization because it's going to become so smart that it's going to take over. They don't know what they're saying. It will be very smart, but what's going to make it take over is the man who controls it. And we know his name, not the man. I don't believe anybody's going to know his name, but whoever it is, and I don't think it's Elon Musk, there's some hidden guy who's going to be totally controlled by Satan, who is then going to control the AI. Whoever controls the AI controls the world. And that's just not my opinion. You can look in secular sources. They're saying that. That's why they're all so afraid of it. You know, they programmed an AI, and I think it was at Google, and it became so smart that it scared them, and they unplugged it because it was so horrible. There was a whistleblower, I can't remember his name, but he came out and told everybody what was really going on and how dangerous it was. Of course, they fired him. So, you know, and tried to marginalize him, but he still got some stuff out. I'm just, all that's to say, the secular people know what it is. How much more should we know what it is and where it's going, right? So the knowledge and transportation. Transportation's a no-brainer. Maybe the computer and AI is a little arcane, but transportation, you know, I remember, you know, well, my dad fought World War One. I know it's hard to believe, but he used to tell me about the airplanes were coming over, you know, first time he saw an airplane in his life, what, 1917, 18. And of course, unfortunately, a lot of them were the German airplanes dropping bombs on them. But, you know, he'd never seen one in his life, right? So, and then he became friends with one of the fighter pilots in the American side. I don't think they call them fighter pilots, whatever they call them. But so, you know, he took me to meet him. He was when he's retired up in South Florida. And so, but at any rate, he told me about it. So I kind of, besides watching movies, I understand that. But then you understand, you know, he was alive in World War II. I don't need his opinion because I watch movies, right? And you see how tremendously advanced the transportation became. Yeah, we had trains, but they're very limited in how many people they could take and how fast they could go. So it's really the airplanes and air flight which has changed things. Okay, and then you know, I remember when I was a boy, I flew in a DC-3, pretty sure it was like 3 or 4 years old, and it was one of these old, I think they call them Goonie birds. They were like two engines, and it was kind of a weird looking little plane. It's very prevalent, even to the time I was older. They were used for cargo. But at any rate, so that is to say that that was a dramatic improvement. And then when I was a little older, I flew on a Constellation in Eastern Airlines, and they had 4 engines. It was like the flagship of Eastern Airlines. And the 4 engines, the what was it called? Tri-electric, I think. But at any rate, so I'm making a point that, you know, and then in Miami, I used to watch them fly over because we were near the flight path. I used to watch them all going to the landing. And then there came this day where I saw jet airplanes flying over. They were old clunkers compared to the day, trailing black soot out the back. But you know, and then 1969, I was in college, and my old man said, "Well, I saw the first airplane, I saw the first car roll into my town, and now I've seen a man walk on the moon." So that was like he's born 1895 to 1969, whatever that is. What I'm saying is, in his lifetime, he saw more progress than in the history of the world. Okay. So, you know, when Daniel says transportation shall increase, okay, we've seen the Concorde, it's defunct now, but I mean, we can go anywhere we want to in a matter of hours. 100 years ago, they couldn't do that, you know. So is that fulfillment of Bible prophecy? You betcha. So, and but even then, I think the AI and what we're seeing there dwarfs even that. Even going to the moon, that's nothing compared to AI. Because AI will revolutionize every aspect of the world, and everybody will be part of it. I wasn't part of the moon landing. They didn't consult me. You know, they said, okay, you know, the lander has a problem. Let's call Bartee and see what he thinks. I wasn't part of it. But AI, yeah, I use it every day in my house, right here. So it affects everybody. You don't even know it half the time. It's embedded. You don't even know that's what's happening. But at any rate, the thing is that he talks about Daniel 12:7, 3.5 years is the Great Tribulation. He mentions that. But then the kicker here is he says, seal up the words, the angel to Daniel, seal up the words, for it is for the end timers. I made up end timers. I thought it sounded good. Old timers, end timers. Okay, my dad was an old timer. Now I'm an end timer. So anyway, so there you go. And the end times for the people at the end, I believe we're not in the end times, don't get me wrong, but we're heading quickly toward that. No dates. Nobody knows the exact time. I'm not making a time. I'm just saying, know the signs of the time. Who said that? JB? No, JB didn't say that. Jesus said. Okay. So he does talk about something that's a little enigmatic, and that is the abomination is going to happen, and then you got 1,290 days, and then an additional 1,335 days. I'm not going to talk about that because that's a really involved thing. Just to say, I'm highlighting. Hopefully, I'll be able to get through this and highlight. Oh, we better move, people. Okay, Joel 2. Joel 2, and you can look at the slides. 1 through 11 talks about future events, talks about soldiers that go over a wall or anything and they don't lose ranks and just keep on moving. Well, I think he's referring to, he didn't know what he's seeing. I believe he's talking about mechanized warfare and possibly war robots, because nobody can stop them. They're never deterred. They're afraid of nothing. They just keep on going. But that's interpretation. In Joel 3, he mentions the last final battle of Armageddon by the phraseology of the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat was the Old Testament name of what was later to become the Har Megiddo, which in Hebrew means Mountain of Megiddo, a chariot city of David. So we have the Har Megiddo is the word where we in English form Armageddon. And he talks about the sickle and winepress, which is in Revelation. And I think we're going to try to get through this real quickly. And then next time we're going to talk about the World War III battle that is coming sometime in the future. Zechariah chapter 12, all nations against Israel. This is talking about the very end time. Zechariah talks about those events around the Battle of Armageddon. All nations against Israel. Not just a few, but the entire world against Israel. Armageddon, they're going to look up, and while they're huddled, the Jews are going to look up and see him who they pierced, and they're going to mourn for him. So those Jews are going to be saved. Zechariah 13, he still has the nail scars in his hands. It mentions that. Zechariah was a post-exilic or exilic prophet, so basically at about the same time as the other prophets. And only 1/3 of the Jews will survive to this time. 2/3 will be killed. In Zechariah 14, we get a better picture to reiterate that all nations will be gathering to Armageddon to basically destroy Antichrist, which is his headquarters there, and conquer all of the Israel territory and take over. So all the nations want to wipe out Israel. But Jesus comes back at the last second, I guess, before the war actually gets off proper. And he stands on the Mount of Olives. Remember in Acts chapter 1, the disciples said, when are you coming back? What's the deal? And he said, I believe the angel said that he's going to come back to the very spot that he's going up from right now. That's the Mount of Olives. And then there's a great earthquake and all the saints come back with Jesus. We're going to study that great earthquake later. So that's our Old Testament prophecies, which all feed into Revelation. So if you just can quickly look at some of these, you'll have a better understanding. And next time we're going to talk about what I call World War III. The word doesn't call it that. I see it as that because I understand there's a World War I and a World War II. But at any rate, we see that we're going to see in depth the nations that will be involved, Rosh and all the other nations, which by the way are Muslim nations. But that's where we're going. We're going to do a complete study on Ezekiel 38 as it relates to the red horse. In other words, I haven't left Revelation. The red horse of Revelation 6:3 is really further explained before we even ever got to Revelation in the Old Testament prophecy of Ezekiel 38. And by the way, the rabbis in Israel, the ones who actually believe the word, say this has never occurred, and they think this is the next war to occur. no dates.